Here now, the Prime Minister of Canada.
Good morning, everyone.
Over the last few weeks, our women and men in uniform have been working to help the most vulnerable Canadians as we deal with this pandemic. And as the need for their help continues, we've received new requests to extend this period of deployment in both Ontario and Quebec, and we will be following up. Members of the Canadian Armed Forces are doing an incredible job, just like always. They are serving with distinction for our grandparents, our parents, our elders. In Ontario, they've made some extremely troubling observations about several long-term care facilities in which they've been serving, and we have shared this information with the provincial government. As I've said many times, we need to do a better job of caring for the people who built this country. The greatest generation saw us through World War II, and we need to be there to support them properly through this global crisis. I spoke with Premier Ford on this earlier this morning to let him know that, of course, we would be there to help as he takes action on improving care for seniors in long-term care centres. Our government will continue to support Ontarians through this, and I know this is something the Premier will be addressing in greater detail at his press conference later today. This morning, I also wanted to provide an update on personal protective equipment. In the last 10 weeks alone, over 40 flights have arrived in Canada carrying much-needed PPE. This represents hundreds of thousands of items, everything from masks to hospital gowns, that we've shipped to our frontline workers. At the same time, we're also investing in production here at home. And on that front, today, we're taking yet another critical step forward. I can announce that we've signed a contract with General Motors to produce 10 million face masks. As we speak, GM employees are already making these masks. They will keep people safe and help slow the spread of COVID-19. And for the auto workers in Oshawa, this contract will support good, well-paying jobs in an industry that's faced tough times. On testing, we're also making progress. We're supporting companies and research centres across the country as they develop new, improved COVID-19 test kits and products. And for life-saving healthcare equipment, we've signed a new contract for 10,000 ventilators that are being produced through a partnership between Canadian Nobel laureate Dr. Art MacDonald, his team, and Vexos. Deliveries will begin this summer, bringing our total of made-in-Canada ventilators to 40,000. On this and on other supplies for frontline workers, I know that Minister Baines and Minister Anand will have more details to share a little later today. In
the last 10 weeks, more than 40 flights carrying personal protective equipment have arrived in Canada. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of different items, including hospital gowns and masks that have been distributed to our frontline workers. At the same time, we are working with companies right across this country to ramp up our domestic capacity to produce these articles here in Canada. Today, I'm able to announce that we have signed a contract with General Motors to produce 10 million face masks. At this point, GM employees have already begun to do that work, and the first batch of masks will soon be available. With respect to testing, we are also making progress. Right across the country, we are supporting companies and research centers that are designing new test kits for COVID-19. And we're doing the same thing on ventilators. We have signed a contract to produce 10,000 ventilators that will be made through a partnership between Art MacDonald, his team, and the company Vexos.
Over the past 2 months, we've rolled out targeted support for sectors that have been hit hard by COVID-19. And we know that more needs to be done. Just look at the food industry. With the growing season underway, farmers are working harder than ever to keep Canadians fed. But because of COVID-19, many are having trouble finding workers. So today I can announce that our government is funding up to 700 youth jobs in that industry. This will support the people who put food on our plates while creating new opportunities for young people. This builds on what we've already done, from connecting more Canadians of every age with work in the sector to supporting seasonal workers.
At this time of year, farmers are working harder than ever to feed Canadians. But because of COVID-19, a number of employers are having a lot of trouble finding workers to help them out. So we will be funding up to 700 youth jobs in that sector. That will help out those who feed our families, while at the same time creating opportunities for students this summer.
In the last weeks, Canadians have been focused on our families and on our neighbours, on our communities and our country. But we've also been closely engaged with how the world is managing COVID-19, not only because the only way to truly end this virus in Canada is to end it everywhere, but because as a trading nation, with Canadians who trace their origins to every corner of the planet, we understand better than most how connected the world has become. Canadian jobs and businesses depend on stable and productive economies in other countries, so it matters to us how everyone weathers this storm. For so many, this pandemic is devastating. More than 300 million people around the world will be out of work, and more than 30 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty. We can't wait for others to act. It's not in our self-interest, and it's just not who we are. We can and we must seize the opportunity to do what we can to make people safer and more prosperous, to create an international system that recognizes who's left behind and strives to lift them up. This is no small task, but I know we're up to it. Canada is ready to do our part as we help bring the world together in the fight against COVID-19. On Thursday, I will be convening a high-level meeting with the Secretary-General of the UN and the Prime Minister of Jamaica to consider global economic challenges and how to better support developing countries. We're bringing together leaders from every region of the world, as well as the heads of international institutions, to work on shared strategies to protect the global economy, support our citizens, and help the most vulnerable. I've been speaking to many leaders about these issues and about the importance of global cooperation. This includes Chancellor Merkel of Germany and President Macron of France just yesterday, and leaders from the Caribbean and from across Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific. And key international financial experts like Canada's own Mark Carney are getting involved too. To address this pandemic, to keep people safe, to help our economies weather the storm, we need to collaborate. And with this forum, Canada will be there to help lead the way forward. Canada
is a trading nation with trading links with many countries around the world. Our workers, our economies, our businesses depend on a global economy that is healthy. And in the midst of a pandemic, we cannot close our eyes to the world we live in. We must not forget the most vulnerable, whether they're people who live in remote regions or people in the Caribbean. For many of them, the pandemic has been a disaster. As Canadians, we know that we have a role to play. We can and we must build a safer and more prosperous world for everyone and ensure that our international system is fair and more equal for all. This is quite a task, but I know we are up to it. On Thursday, I will be convening a high-level meeting with the Secretary-General of the UN and the Prime Minister of Jamaica to address the current challenges and look at various ways of helping developing countries. This will be an opportunity for leaders to get together and develop strategies to protect the global economy, support our citizens, and help the most vulnerable. I discussed those matters and the importance of international cooperation with a number of leaders. Yesterday, I spoke to Chancellor Merkel of Germany and President Macron of France, and I've also had discussions with leaders from the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Pacific region. And of course, key financial experts as well, such as the Canadian Mark Carney. They will also be participating. If we all work together and we remain focused on what we must do, I know we will be able to get through this together and come back strong afterwards. Thank you.
We'll now go to the phone for questions. One question, one follow-up. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. For questions, star 1. Première question, Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous.
Good morning, Prime Minister. First of all, about the military. You talked about extending their mission, but you didn't say until when. Do you know how long that mission will be extended? Well, it's only in recent days. Yesterday from CHEK, for example, we received a request for an extension, so we have to have some discussions with the two provinces, but of course we will be there to help them.
We just received the requests for assistance in the past days, including only yesterday for Quebec. So we will be following up with the Premier's offices, but of course we will continue to help.
Right, and suivi?
Follow-up? Are there other asylum workers working in long care homes? Now, is your government prepared to process their applications quickly, as many are asking? Well, for a number of weeks now, the Minister of Immigration has been working on that specific issue. We know that there are some extraordinary people doing heroic work in our long-term care facilities, and we must look at how we can help them, and that's precisely what we're doing now.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Mia Rabson, the Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning. I'm just curious if you can explain to us what the difference is between the special COVID-19 committee being safe to sit in Parliament if you don't think it's safe for the full House of Commons to sit in reduced numbers.
I think it's been important that we've had a parliament and a democracy that has continued to function. Over the past number of weeks, we've had 3 days a week of sessions where the opposition can bring forward their questions, make their suggestions, and demonstrate to all Canadians that our institutions continue to function. We know that continuing that approach now 4 days a week will be important to continue to respond to this extraordinary challenge of our time. We are, however, continuing to work on the issue of voting. Before we move forward on voting, we want to try and make sure as much as possible that we are able to bring in remote voting. I know that the PROC Committee of Parliament is studying that carefully. I think it'd be important to ensure that Canadians across the country have an ability to make their voices and their decisions heard in Parliament through that process. That continues to be something that we're working on.
And a follow-up?
Yeah, I'm also curious, given that you had a known exposure to COVID-19 early on, when the serological testing becomes available, do you plan to get one?
Yes, I do. I think serological testing is an important part of understanding exactly how COVID-19 has been present in the country, including in people who haven't displayed any symptoms at all. And as soon as those tests become more largely available to Canadians, I will certainly ensure that I'm one of them.
I think it is important to know to what extent COVID-19 has spread among our population, including among people who are asymptomatic, including possibly myself. So when those tests will be more widely available, I intend to become tested.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to the asylum seekers issue. I'd just like to know, do you agree with the principle of regularizing the status of certain individuals or expediting the processing of their application or even putting them in the immigrant process, as Quebec seems to be requesting? Well, for quite some time now, we've realized that people coming into this country make a strong contribution to our protection and our success as a country. Our government has always been open to immigration and has always appreciated the people who come into this country. When it comes to asylum seekers who came into the country through irregular means and are now working in our long-term care homes and are doing heroic work to protect Canadians, we are currently looking at how we can recognize that work and expedite the process, and the Minister of Immigration is working precisely on that. I know that there has been a change of position on the part of Ms. Freeland. A week ago, she was saying we are a country that abides by the rule of law. We have to use the regular processes. But now it seems like you're prepared to do things somewhat differently. Well, we are in a situation that is quite exceptional and unprecedented. COVID-19 is demanding that we review certain ways of doing things, and that includes our immigration system. Now, that system is focused on abiding by the regular processes and treating everyone fairly, and it's important to follow those processes. But in an exceptional situation, we can, of course, consider exceptions.
Merci. Prochaine question. Operator.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Now, on immigrants, Mr. Trudeau, how many irregular asylum seekers do you think have been coming in? And I understand you agree with the principle, but what are the problems that could surround securing their status? Well, I think people recognize that heroes who are doing exceptional work in a very difficult situation should be recognized as such. And we have an immigration system that is robust and rigorous and complex. Therefore, the Minister of Immigration is currently looking very carefully at what this kind of approach would involve, and we understand that people feel there's a need to thank those individuals, but we also want to make sure it's done properly. Follow-up? Yes, as a follow-up, Mr. Trudeau, on another issue, the wage subsidy, the leader of the Bloc Québécois has been suggesting that you are not being a moral leader on that issue. He doesn't understand how you could be asking for the wage subsidy. And as the leader of your party, will you demand that your party not use that wage subsidy, or will you go ahead with it? The wage subsidy was introduced to help all organizations, all businesses that have seen a decline in their revenue in order to help the workers. The subsidy does not judge the type of work or the type of business or organization that is involved. We simply look at how we can help people who rely on that job to keep their paycheck and to be able to support their family and buy their groceries. Now, in political parties, there are people who work as translators, as accountants, as receptionists. These are people who do important work for themselves and for their families, and we created the wage subsidy to help precisely these kinds of people to help to keep their jobs rather than being laid off, possibly because of a decline in the organization's revenue. Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. At the beginning of your speech, you referred to the soldiers working in the long-term cares that have made some troubling observations. Is that only in Ontario or also in Quebec? And what are we talking about? Distress, negligence? Could you be more specific about those troubling observations? And how did you feel about that when you heard this? Well, I read the report yesterday coming from the Canadian Armed Forces, and I can tell you that it was extremely troubling. I got that. We sent that report to the Government of Ontario over the weekend, and we will be discussing that further, and we will be there to help. But there is no doubt that we must do much better when it comes to supporting our seniors in these long-term care homes right across the country. That report talks specifically about the situation in Ontario, but we continue to be vigilant across the country.
I read the report in full yesterday. We shared it with the provincial government of Ontario over the weekend. It is deeply disturbing. There are things in there that are extremely troubling, and we need to take action. And I spoke with the Premier this morning to assure him that, of course, the federal government would be there to support them as they deal with this situation. We need to do a better job of taking care of our elders in long-term care facilities in Ontario and indeed right across the country. The Premier will be sharing this report with Canadians in the coming hours and will be speaking at more length on it, and I will leave that for him.
Now, without going into detail, because you don't want to scoop the Premier of Ontario, what bothered you the most in that report? And in terms of your own emotions, were you sad? Were you disgusted? Were you shocked? How did you respond? Well, the answer is yes. I was sad. I was shocked. I was disappointed. I was angry. I believe that we're talking about a situation that clearly is a reality associated with COVID-19, but has also existed for quite some time now. And we must, as a country, improve the situation in those care homes. But I will allow Premier Ford to comment more on this. But as I've said several times since the beginning of this pandemic, these are our seniors who are suffering the most as a result of COVID, and we have to do better to support them. And the federal government will be there to take part in any discussions that will take place now and in the future to improve that support for the people who built this country.
On reading the deeply disturbing report, I had obviously a range of emotions of anger, of sadness, of frustration, of grief. It is extremely troubling, and as I've said from the very beginning of this, we need to do a better job of supporting our seniors in long-term care right across the country through this pandemic and beyond. This is a situation that has gone on for a long time. We need to take action as a country. The federal government will be there to support provinces in their jurisdictions on dealing with this as we move forward.
Tom Perry with CBC. You've read this report. Are you concerned that the problems that it reveals are not limited only to Ontario? And what specifically can the federal government do right now to deal with these issues?
Well, the federal government is there to help. We have stepped up with members of the Canadian Armed Forces in a number of long-term care facilities across the province and indeed across Ontario and Quebec. But the challenges faced by this system of long-term cares is larger than just the places that the Canadian Armed Forces are showing up in. So we need to have a conversation and we need to take action as a country on improving care. There are many extraordinary, excellent long-term care facilities across this country. There are some that obviously are not doing as well, that we need to make sure we are improving the standards of care and the support for Canadians as they retire, as they reach that phase of their lives. The federal government, as I've said from the beginning, will be part of the conversations with the provinces on how we move forward, how we learn from this crisis and what we've learned through this crisis, and move forward. Okay.
We are facing a situation that clearly has existed since long before the pandemic in a number of long-term care homes, where we're seeing that the support given our seniors is not up to scratch. And of course, there are seniors' residences and centers that are extraordinary in terms of the way they care for our seniors, our elders. However, there are other facilities that do not meet our standards. And as I said right from the outset, as a society and as a country, we have to work together to improve the care we provide to our seniors. The federal government will be there to support the provinces in that work.
I could ask you about PPEs. You're talking about the flights that have arrived, but where are we running into bottlenecks? What's preventing us from getting even more of this equipment?
I think there are global challenges around provision of PPE. We have demonstrated with 40 flights and hundreds of thousands of items, many in the millions, that we have received and distributed across the country, that we are providing for Canadians as we need to. But at the same time, we recognize that as the economy reopens, as perhaps a second wave might hit us, we need to be ready. And that's why we continue to draw on even more PPE. We continue to go through stringent and rigorous quality control, because we have seen a rise in counterfeit products and products that don't meet rigorous Canadian standards. We have ensured that every item that has been distributed in Canada has met our standards. But it's why we've also moved towards increasing and creating domestic production for PPE, and Canadians stepping up to help Canadians is what this country is all about, and we're going to continue to do the work necessary to ensure that right across the country we have the PPE necessary to move forward safely.
From the very beginning, we have been working to ensure that personal protective equipment is distributed right across this country, that it is of high quality, and we continue to receive items from countries around the world. But at the same time, we are creating local domestic production here, because we know that as the economy reopens, we will need even more PPE. And we have to be ready for a second potential wave. And we will be ready, because that's what we're working towards as a country.
Was it the findings related to the conditions that people are living in long-term care homes, or did it rise, in your view, to the level of abuse? And in either case, what would you say to people in Ontario whose family members are in these homes right now when they're hearing you talk about this? What should they do?
As I said, the report that we received, we passed along immediately to Ontario. We are working with them on the next steps, but I will leave it to Premier Ford to share that report and discuss the next steps in a couple of hours when he moves forward for his press conference.
As you know, tomorrow we're expecting a decision on Meng Wanzhou's extradition, and this is going to upset people on one side or the other, either the Chinese or the Americans. I'm wondering what level of interaction there's been between your government and your counterparts on the Chinese side and the American side preparing for one of those two possible outcomes. Are you concerned, and have you spoken to them about the possibility of retaliation if it doesn't go their way?
We have continued to engage diplomatically with our partners, both with the Americans and the Chinese, on the issue of Meng Wanzhou and indeed of the two Michaels who've been arbitrarily detained in China. But one of the good things about having a truly independent justice system is that we don't need to apologize or explain for the decisions taken by our independent justice system. We have confidence in that system, in its independence, and we, of course, will continue to abide and defend our system. Évidemment, la diplomatie
Of course,
est continuelle entre le Canada
there
et la
is
Chine, le Canada et
constant
les
diplomacy
États-Unis
between
sur
Canada, the United States, and China on various issues, including the Canadians detained in China. But one of the advantages of a fully independent judicial system is that we don't have to explain or make excuses for our system. We have confidence in the judgment that comes out of that system and the approach taken by people in our independent judicial system. And that's a major advantage we have in Canada.
Mr. Janet Silver, Global News. Just to follow up on extending the military's mission in long-term care facilities and the horrible conditions the report showed that they have found, Public Safety Minister Bill Blair received a letter back on May 14th outlining these allegations of abuse and neglect. Do you know why the minister and his office would have sat on this letter for 10 days before acting?
When we received this report, we shared it with Ontario. I found out the existence of this report on Friday afternoon. On the weekend, we shared it with Ontario. I read the report yesterday, and it is being made public today. These are things that we needed to move quickly on. These are things that we need to take action on. And as I said, the federal government will be there to support Ontario and other provinces as they move forward.
And just to switch gears a bit, one of your Vancouver MPs has a CHEK group she uses to communicate with Canadians. She has publicly advertised on this group and invited people to join, so it's kind of like a Facebook page, if you will. And she's allowed the group to be used to appeal to Canadians to donate to a lawsuit against a Global News journalist for a story that they don't like. The MP I'm talking about is your Digital Minister for Government, Ms. Joyce Murray. Her mandate letter calls for her to work with the media in, quote, a professional manner. So I'm just wondering why you're allowing this minister and her staff to use the web presence to fundraise on a lawsuit against a journalist.
This is the first I hear of this situation, and we'll be following up. This is
the first time I've heard about this situation, and we will be following up.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée.
Thank you all.
And that is the